I wanted to talk to you a little bit about warblers. I thought, we'll do this identification, how to identify warblers and have all 37 of the warbler species that we can find here. And then I thought, wow, we're going to be here all night. Because you start talking about these birds are hard not. So I took a little different tact. I wanted to kind of hand cherry pick a few warblers out that kind of talks about, their ephemeral nature here. Warblers are not, there are several species of warblers that do nest here. Most of them migrate through here in the spring and the fall. And so you got to kind of be out at the right times to see them. Well, how do you, know about when they're out and where to go? And so we'll talk a little bit about that. Pete mentioned eBird and the eBird hotspots. How many of you have an eBird account if you're a birder? Okay, quite a few. If you don't, I would suggest signing up. You might not be doing a lot of eBird lists. I don't put a lot of lists on eBird, but I use it as a tool to find out, where are the birds now? Where are they today? You can do that by looking at some of the lists and what's been seen at this park for the last 30 days, the last 4 days, what was seen here yesterday, because there's enough eBirders out there now that kind of give us a clue. So we'll talk a little bit about utilizing that tool. But also what to look for. How do you get into identifying warblers? Well, they're not sparrows. That's a good thing, okay? Sparrows are tough. Warblers are fairly easy to learn to identify, but sometimes they're hard to see because they don't necessarily sit still and wait for you to, say, look at me. They don't do that. But so in Illinois, we do have 37 species of warblers that can kind of regularly be found here in Illinois. 15 of those are possible nesters. We'll talk about a few of the nesters. One species is here. Almost all warblers are high insect diet. That's basically what they're eating. They're not seed eaters, but one of them will eat some berries, the yellow rump warbler. And so they can be kind of a winter bird. They can hang around during the winter time as well, but almost everything else goes further south, Gulf Coast or further south. When you're trying to identify any bird, and kind of warblers in particular, things to know when you're out and about, because if you know these things, it can help you in the identification process. Do they nest here or are they migrants? If birds nest here, chances are they're going to migrate here, and as soon as they get here, they're going to set up territory. That means there's going to be trying to keep other birds out of their territories. So if it's a nesting species, you're not going to see it in a flock. Okay, it's going to be solitary birds chasing away others of its species. So you're not going to see a flock of ovenbirds, we'll say here, because they are nesters. What's their behavior? What are they doing? Are they walking on the ground? Do they have a particular habit that they keep doing? Do they keep pumping their tail or something like that? What is their behavior? What are they doing? Where are they feeding? Are they way up in the top of the trees, looking for insects, or are they kind of scuttling through the ground? Those are important. Singular or in groups. That kind of goes back to the migrating. If you see a flock of things and you think, gosh, those look like palm warblers. Well, if you're seeing a flock of warblers, chances are they are palm warblers because they're one of the ones who will actually travel in a flock. So getting to know these things about the bird, it helps in the identification process. Male or female, immature, those are all in the spring of the year. They'll be in beautiful breeding plumage. In the fall of the year, there's a whole section in field guides called Confusing Fall Warblers. And the colors are still there. They're going to be a little muted. The patchiness will be around. Again, that gets back to the time of year. When are you out birding? Is it spring, summer, or fall? Or winter? What sound do they make? Are they making a noise that you can identify? So those are all the clues that Sherlock Holmes would look for if he's trying to identify a bird that he doesn't know. Well, let's look, yellow rump warbler. And I think it's improperly named because it's not very often you see the rump of a yellow rump warbler. So think of it as the yellow armpit warbler, okay? Because both the male and female have that pretty distinctive um, yellow on the kind of the where the wing connects to the body. And again, this is a species that'll be here in the, you know, sometimes throughout the winter, oftentimes in the, well, let's look at the range map. And here you can see we are in their winter range. Knowing how to read a range map will kind of help you in the process of getting to know these birds. So this range map is from Cornell's All About Birds. If you've ever used that website, some of the photos and things are from there too. So we'll give a shout out to All About Birds for this. But these range maps, if you see, the blue in this case is non-breeding. That means, winter. Yellow is where they are during migration, and this is their breeding range. If you see this purple color, that's kind of a year round. So this is a bird that will be here, migrate through in the fall. It might hang around through the winter, but it might go further south. Most of the birds, when they're migrating through the different migration corridors, if they're a bird that's up in this part of they're gonna come down to the Gulf Coast. If they're birds that are over in upstate New York or something, they're gonna go down the East Coast and then they're gonna fly across and migrate into the Caribbean. So the birds that we're seeing are birds in Canada, or from upper Midwest in Canada. So the other part of getting to know birds and having tools to use to know the birds is by going into, this is another reason to have an eBird account. You can go online and get bar graphs for when people are seeing them, okay? So this happens to be, you can go in to the Explore section of eBird and kind of say, I want to see a bar graph for Peoria, Tazewell, Woodford County year round from 1985 to actually this is 1973 to 2018, I think is the last date I used on this. And so this tells you when in these 3 counties yellow rump warblers are apt to be seen. And you can see we do have a few that have been spotted during the winter season. Majority of them, as the bars get wider, they're more prevalent. Here in May, we're kind of at the peak of their visitation right now, and they'll peter off as they head north. So these are all the hot spots in the kind of Tri-County area where this bird is seen. So this is a good example of a bird that's ubiquitous throughout the region. This is a bird you can see and hear in your backyard. They're fairly common. Remember, they're migrating through here. They're not thinking about nesting yet. They're not territorial. They're not looking for prime nesting sites. They're just hanging out. They're enjoying they're chilling. Okay, really chilling this year. It's been a cold spring, so they're ubiquitous throughout our region. You'll find them. They're always at the top of trees where they look like a leaf from below, and so you have to just look for motion. In winter, some of the seeds that they eat here, I've seen them eating seeds. They really love poison ivy, big old poison ivy vines that hold on to their berries throughout the winter. If you can find one of those, you're almost guaranteed, if you come to it often enough, you're going to see a overwintering yellow rump warbler in them. They also eat dogwood, cedars, wild grapes. Their song is a slow, soft whistled warble or trill. We kind of call them, there's a group of warblers we call Tweedledee warblers. They just Tweedledee, they just kind of do a non-distinct song. It's hard to put a word, phonetics as to what they're saying, but they're definitely one of our birds. So by combining what we know about these warblers, It's not a bird you're going to see in the summer. So if you're seeing them, you know, in the summertime, maybe it's not this bird. What else could it be? You know, then you can kind of use the time of year to help you identify, to narrow down on the identification. Finally, let's look at bird counts. I've been involved with every year in Illinois since 1974. There's been a spring bird count that takes place. Every county has a compiler who sends people out, or you know, and volunteers work with that compiler to cover territories and count birds. So you can kind of get a gauge. On one side of this graph, we have the raw bird counts. How many birds, and this happens to be Peoria, Tazewell, and Woodford counties from 74 to 2018. That's I ran out of time to crunch data, but 24 from 74 to 2018. And you can see their numbers have been fairly steady, but boy, we had a real peak in 2013. Close to over 900 birds were seen in the Tri-County area, or documented. So why would that be? Do we have any thought? Yeah, it's a matter of, and now we have a new tool that I haven't even put into the tool list here, and that's what do they call it? Birdcast. So you can kind of see how many birds are migrating over at any given time. Where the tool is a little weak is that it doesn't also, they need to also show frontal boundaries on there, because if you can time it right, so that if you get a frontal boundary when migration is high, if you get a cold front moving as the birds are coming up south, if the cold front becomes a stationary and keeps them, they'll just come to the ground and they'll stay there until they get another southern flow taking north. So they pile up. It's kind of like going across the McCluggage Bridge at the wrong time, okay? So yeah, they get piled up there and they wait until the conditions are right for them to move on. So that happened to be a fallout year, but it was odd that it was really only for that bird. It wasn't a fallout year for a lot of other warblers, but for whatever reason, we had a whole bunch of yellow-rumped warblers migrating at the same time, and they piled up. So I'm going to change gears. I'm going to get to a species that nests here, and it might show you how these tools can help with this. So this is the ovenbird, tiny little thing. They're a ground nester and a ground feeder, so you can't mistake him for one of the tree warblers. Chances are you're going to hear it before you see it. And the males and females are similar. They almost look like a tiny thrush of some type, but they have some little head stripes that are often obvious. But they do feed in shrubs. They're called an ovenbird because their nest looks like a little, I don't know what kind of, maybe like a little pizza oven sitting on the ground with an opening in it. And so that's how they get their name. But you can see this is a species, we're in their breeding territory. They migrate through, again, Caribbean, Central America, northern coast of South America. And again, the birds coming, Eastern migration tends to be these Caribbean birds, and the rest of the birds are coming down through Central America. And again, this map and the timeline for their visit is very different than we saw for the previous bird. This is one where you'll see through the summertime. And if you look at the hot spots where this is being seen, you can see that it's following major river valleys where there's woodlands. So they're tied closely to forest tracts with a developed canopy and understories that are not taken over by bush honeysuckle. And they like that open woodland. They're a local nesting species, so they hit our region and they're immediately territorial, okay? So you don't see them in flocks. You see them individually. Shrub and ground feeder, ground nester. They're loud. They have a teacher, teacher, teacher that teacher, teacher, teacher. It sounds like he's saying through the woods, the male call. A song is kind of reminiscent of a Carolina wren or maybe a Kentucky warbler, but a little like he's playing that song, but with a different instrument. Okay. So one of the things that you can also do with eBird is, you can take a look at these. This is year round, but you can limit your search and say, I only want to see, from June 15th through the end of July. That tends to be the time when birds nest. And if you look for that, then you're going to find out where are they nesting. So again, you can kind of see those. There's fewer in the summertime, obviously, because their populations are lower. So some of these hot spots where they were seen earlier are now kind of not on this time frame. So this happens to be June, July time frame. And you can see along the bluffs of the Illinois River, Metamora. This happens probably to be Black Partridge Park is an area where they'll nest. Farmdale, this Farmdale down here. So, and of course over here in the Mackinac watershed. Jubilee Park is another one that they seem to like. So that's a song you'll hear throughout the summer. That's a bird you'll see throughout the summer, the ovenbird. Since it's a nester, when we look at bird counts, a couple peaks. We had a peak, and again, 80 birds. This over here, what are birds per hour? Well, one of the things, and this I've done a lot when we do the bird counts. Everybody says, well, why do you need to know how many hours I'm out in the field? The people are counting. So, well, that's very important because birds per hour is a kind of an equalizer. When we look at bird data, birds per hour become very important because it can tell us whether or not we're, if the data is obviously birds per hour should kind of follow the raw bird counts. Sometimes they're higher, sometimes they're a little lower, but it gives it an equalization so that we can start comparing apples to apples. If the Peoria bird count put in 500 volunteer hours on that bird count, but Polk County in southern Illinois only had one guy who was birding for 8 hours, that makes it tough to say, are there more birds in Peoria County? They saw more birds, but there's probably more in Polk County, but they don't have the population to go count them. So we can look at them at different counties, compare them side by side, and say, that birds per hour that we're seeing here is very similar to the birds per hour we're seeing there. So the populations must be somewhat similar. So that's what birds per hour are. But again, here we had a peak, and this is 2011. For whatever reason, we had a peak there of almost 70, I think it was about 78 birds in the Tri-County region. So, and then some years, nothing, So those years it was nothing, it was probably a late summer or late spring, or maybe a little bit earlier bird count. Okay, move along. Tennessee warbler has nothing to do with Tennessee, but it was probably first identified there or discovered there. Male and female, a little different. We call these kind of the little gray birds or the little olive birds. They flit around. These we'll see in flocks, probably one of our more numerous birds. I heard them right out in the parking lot just a few minutes ago. Again, they're tough to see. They're leaf colored. They're kind of up in the treetops. The little black eye stripe on the male and the female is if you do get a glimpse of them, that is noticeable. So again, very similar to some of the other birds we're seeing. These are only migratory here. So when we look at when we see them, again, compressed in the spring, they're a little more leisurely going south in the fall. Very numerous in fallout conditions, and the song is a 3-part rapid succession of high chips. It accelerates towards the end, kind of a ticka 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 ticka. It's kind of trills out with a little c. It gets faster as it goes. Much like the yellow rump warbler, these things are everywhere. during migration. And if we were, I didn't even put a map up here, a breeding map, because it would just be blank. So you're seeing them all along. You'll see them, even in the heart of the city. These are, again, this is another species. It'll be in the backyard. Bird counts, highest count, about a couple hundred. That's 2015 count. It's probably the high count for it. Kind of another one, the Nashville warbler often travels, you'll see, with the Tennessee warbler. I wonder if that's a coincidence. Yeah, Nashville, Tennessee, I know. Probably they were both found down there originally. A little more color and very much a really prominent eye ring, both male and female. The color on the male a little brighter, but you can definitely tell that these two birds are related species. Related, the male and female of the same species. The male, sometimes you'll see that little kind of some red feathering or kind of maroon feathering on the head. It's not real common that you're gonna be able to get that close a look at them, though. Very much like Tennessee, there is a western species or a western kind of tribe of these birds over here. They'll actually go down the California coast. Some of them will nest or overwinter along the coast. Some will move further south into Central America. But there is one that you'll find up in northern Wisconsin. Go up to Vilas County and some of the areas up there. You'll find them nesting at that site. Again, Nashville, you won't find them in the summer. You won't find them in the winter. Compressed in the spring. So in the spring, birds tend to migrate fast. They want to get on and get to the nesting territory, find their mate, raise their young, do that. And then in the fall, they take more a leisurely route to get south. So we'll see them from mid-August, depending on the weather, of course, through October, sometimes into November. The one thing, if you're looking this bird kind of has the tendency to act like it's going to fall out of the tree. It'll be up in a treetop, and it'll be right out on the lowest limb, and it just kind of, they'll just almost hang upside down, and then they'll right themselves up, and so they'll turn themselves upside down to get to the bottom of leaves, especially on oak trees. So the song is reminiscent of a Tennessee warbler, but it's a 2-part trill instead of a 3-part trill. So easy, fairly easy to identify that way. And again, another one we'll see close to 100 of them. It was a good year for them. This was kind of the peak that we were seeing those birds here in Peoria, Tazewell, and Woodford counties. Oops. Worm-eating warbler. Somebody mentioned that earlier. I heard somebody mentioning it. Pete didn't he? Yeah. Okay. So this is a species that's actually kind of it's a southern species. It's a long-range migrator in that it comes, from Central America and the Caribbean, and it's kind of the lower Ohio, lower Mississippi River Valley nesting species. But every once in a while, we'll get them to they'll overshoot their mark, and they will nest here in Peoria, in the Peoria area. So again, we see them May, June, yeah. But this is year round, okay? These are the sites where it's seen year round. And now this needs to be updated because Pete found one where it was right in here. So this can actually be, that's a nice thing about these. Yeah, go ahead, Pete.
Thick and padlock.
Okay.
At Spring Creek.
Okay. So yeah, there'll be a new spot on. If you go to look at this map, there'll be a new spot for the Spring Creek hotspot. This bird, it's an uncommon bird around here, but we tend to see the birds that we're seeing here are some that are moving north beyond their historic range. So, and that happens during migration. They can overshoot where they're wanting to go, or they'll maybe be kicked out of where they want to be, and then so they'll just keep going a little bit further north. So you'll find them low to the ground, steep wooded valleys. We see them around, at least in Peoria and Tazewell. You see them at like Singing Woods, Forest Park, Black Partridge Park. It's a dry insect-like trill. The song of this bird almost sounds kind of chipping sparrow-like, but maybe a metallic chipping sparrow. And oftentimes they'll perch in the open when they're singing. So if you hear something that says, you think that's kind of like a chipping sparrow, but I'm not in chipping sparrow territory here. I'm way down in Black Partridge Park along the creek. Then might be listening. Pete?
Yeah, Merlin cannot tell the difference between worm-eating warbler and chipping sparrow.
Yeah.
They sound very similar to the ear, and Merlin can't tell the difference either.
So if we look at, these are where there are no nesters here. They've been seen at Singing Woods and at Jubilee. And they're further in McLean County, they've been seen there too. But in the Tri-County area here, those are the only two sites we've seen them during nesting season. And you can see up here in that June nesting season. It's possible that what we're seeing at that time are maybe not nesting birds or not successful nesting birds, but they're males that have been thrown off territory to the south. So, we really, when we say nesting, they're here during nesting season, but it's not like we found their nests. Okay. And so again, a bird that's not real common, you wouldn't think that we'd have a whole lot of them showing up on our bird counts, although we did this year in this, I think it was 2022 was a high count for them at that point. Palm warbler. Again, this male and female are similar. Yellowish bird, little maroon lineage or along the breast. The red cap. This is a tail bobber. When they sit in a tree, their tail is always moving. This is a bird that most of the ones that are flying through here are just going to go down to the Gulf Coast. Some will go across the Gulf Coast, the Gulf of Mexico, and into Central America. Again, they nest. They're a northern nester. Not too many palm trees up there, but they were discovered down here. So palm warbler nesting, and here's some of the eBird data. And so this is one that is, again, another one of those that's kind of ubiquitous throughout our region. This is one that you could see in your backyard. Mid-level and ground feeders, they're the warbler that doesn't necessarily act like a warbler sometimes. You'll see them walking on the ground, or jumping on the ground. Oftentimes they'll feed on grass. They'll also be in shrubs in edge habitat. High numbers, again, we will catch these at high numbers some years. They do like to flock together in groups. And remember, for that behavior, they're not interested in nesting when they're here. They'll get territorial when they get to their nesting grounds. Mechanical trill, junco-like song. They don't often sing when they're here. They're not quite even into singing at this point. But you will hear them. You will hear their song periodically. Again, this is one we've seen, above 200 counts. 2011, that was a big year. We had a lot of birds. Here's I put in another trophy bird for you to find. The hooded warbler, male and female. The obvious gets the name. The female, looks. You just get the hint of that hood decoration. This is a bird that, kind of like the worm-eating warbler, is a southern species. It's, Ohio River Valley, lower Mississippi Valley, but then there are these kind of adjunct populations, breeding populations. And one of the way we get those populations is through like eBird. When these maps get updated, It's those eBird and also nesting bird surveys that help us kind of track and modify these maps as time goes on. So it is a bird that we kind of associate as more of a southern species, but we have some adjunct populations that are kind of in this area. It is probable nester here. So the Tri-County region, this is where they've been seen on a year-round, on a kind of a year-round level. If we just look at the nesting population, again, it's like Jubilee and Singing Woods are two of the areas it's been seen during the nesting season, even into July in some of these areas. So it's, like I say, it's uncommon. It's a probable nester. It actively flits through shrubbery understories. They're territorial year-round, so you're not going to see them flocking together. They're going to be, if you see them here, they're going to be defending a territory from other birds. So we hear them during migration right now. You've got a pretty good chance of seeing them in several places up and down the river valley. And where was the one was most recently added? Did you say, Pete, did you have one at?
I think Lisa Funk got them in Jubilee, the northern part of Jubilee.
Yeah.
And I think there was a sighting also
Was
in
it
Spring Creek.
This is Spring Creek. That's where I thought there'd be another one. Yeah, so that's one to keep your eyes open for in Spring Creek, because I don't think we have it documented in Spring Creek yet. And again, these are maps that only go up to 2018. When we look at populations of them, again, this is a bird that's not real common. You're seeing less than a handful of them in the Tri-County spring counts. Every once in a while, we'll get one or two maybe in Peoria County. I don't have the data this year all compiled for Peoria County. Okay, going to go through a couple water thrushes for you, because these are fun birds. Louisiana water thrush is a nester. I'll show you the northern water thrush in a little bit. It's not a nester here. But Louisiana water thrush, male and female are similar. To distinguish, they both look similar. They look like thrushes with a short tail, and they're smaller than a thrush. Is their habit. We call these log walking, wet-footed tail bobbers or butt bobbers, because they're when they walk along a log in a wet area, they often will bob their tail. So the male and female look similar, but that eye stripe, that bright eye stripe, differentiates it from the Louisiana water thrush, which has kind of a yellowish eye stripe. Again, their territory and where we tend to see them, they tend to be an early arrival here. We'll see these coming in March. And when they come, they immediately start singing, the males do. That they're setting up territory. They're not found in flocks. Any of the creeks, like the Valley Creek, that here at the Nature Center, Spring Creek, these are all great places to find these birds. And again, that's where they nest. They tend to nest up if there's like a sloughed creek bed. They'll nest up underneath the vegetation that's kind of overhanging. So that's where they nest, and they'll defend about over 100 yards of creek. So if you walk down a creek, you'll hear their song. Their song is a real loud three descending whistles, and then kind of a varied warble at the end. But tweet, 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 and then it kind of goes on and rambles for a while, kind of like I do. So look at those intermittent streams through the bluffs of the Illinois River. And like I said, they'll defend like 100 yards or so or more of territory. And so you'll hear that same bird singing up and down, and he'll fly up and down the creek making that song. And then you'll get further down the creek, and then you'll hear one in the distance coming back to you. So if the creek has water in it, chances are they're going to be there. We see these, like I said, they tend to be an early arrival. Here's their nesting, by the way. So here's where we see them year round, and here's where we're seeing them through the nesting season. So the same kind of culprits. Spring count data, again, not the huge numbers, not the hundreds. We'll have, in the 20s in some years, 2011, and then 2015 was another kind of peak. So here's the northern. Again, kind of same build, but that eye stripe just is not as prominent, or it's a little more beige color, and it's not the white eye stripe. Now this is a species that is a northern species, and so they're not as interested in creeks. They tend to nest a little bit differently. They like marsh edges and bog edges. So where we tend to find these, first of all, when they're migrating through, you can sometimes find them in odd spots, little wet puddles, ditches, roadside ditches. You can sometimes find them there. They will sing, but it's not like they're super territorial. They're in the ditch because it's familiar, but it's not like a respectable northern water thrush would ever think of nesting here. It's just familiar. This is the familiar saloon that's like the one my pub back home. They'll kind of hang around during migration, and then they'll once they get north, then they get a little bit more territorial. So we tend to see them more widespread than the Louisiana water thrush. Okay, so you'll see these in some odd places. Backwater pools, ephemeral wetlands, bottomlands, all right, along the Illinois River, places where the Louisiana water thrush is not going. So you can kind of use location to tell, okay, is this a northern water thrush or is it a Louisiana water thrush? If I'm hearing it in a probable nesting place, maybe I'll lean towards a Louisiana water thrush. If I'm along the Illinois River in the floodplain, chances are it's probably going to be a northern water thrush, because that's not where the Louisianas like to nest. Ground feeding, log walking butt bobber is kind of what they're known for being. Their song, it's really loud. It's a variable song, 3-part series: sweet, 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 choo, choo, choo. So it's loud like the Louisiana water thrush, but more ringing than the Louisiana water thrush. Spring count data. Again, we'll get years. 2011 was a year where we had over 60 of them in the Tri-County area. Okay, getting towards the end here. American redstart. This is male and female. Whoops, male and female. The little wing bar, How does it look like it does not like, what's the warbler? Nashville warbler, or yellow rumped warbler doesn't have the head pattern. The yellow armpit warbler, you got to be careful. So male and female, these birds are nesters here. So think about what we know about nesters. What do they do when they get here? They tend to be territorial. There's always the ones that break the rules, and the redstarts are the ones that break the rules because they will sometimes flock here. And probably the ones that we're seeing flocking are those, because they'll nest almost down to the Gulf Coast, all the way up to Hudson Bay. So they've got kind of a long band of where they will nest. And so the ones that we're seeing that are breaking the no flocking rules are probably ones that the urge hasn't hit them yet to be territorial. So again, kind of ubiquitous throughout during migration, much rarer nesting here. They're mid-tree canopy, hyperactive feeders. The nesting hotspots that we see them. So this is year-round data. If we look at nesting times, you see a lot of them fall out. Singing Woods, Tawny Oaks, Jubilee are kind of the hot spots where we see them most during the nesting season. You can tell their song. It's a Tweedledee warbler with a sneeze at the end. Witchu kind of ends his song with a little achoo. So if you can kind of hear the Tweedledee warbler that sneezes at the end, that's kind of your a red start giveaway. And data, some years, 2011, what a year. Yeah. All right. So what does spring count data actually tell us? I mean, counts are a snapshot, but think about it. It's a snapshot of the entire state of Illinois on a given day or a given weekend. And so while one count's data is probably not too, statistically significant. The more you get in numbers, the more you get in data, and as long as they've been, it does add up. We also know, we've learned, warbler numbers are heavily dependent on location of weather fronts. These birds will sit in queue and they'll wait for a southerly flow to take them north. So that's very important. Yeah, we learned that 2011 was a great year for birding. Yeah, any single count is not statistically significant, but aggregations, of separate counts become more significant. And I think the other thing is birders have gotten better. When I look back at some of the early data from our counts, one, there was not very many birders that were out doing the counts. The other thing is as citizen scientists, I think we've gotten better. We know now how to say, okay, there's 10 birds. I can take that 10 and we're getting much better at counting birds. 10 birds, 20 birds, 30 birds, 40 birds. We're getting better at doing that and we have numerous tools to our advantage. When that first bird count started in 74, Vernon Clean started the first spring count. There was one book out of the Peterson Field Guide, and there was about 20 pages of color plates. The rest was just words in black and white. Okay, so our tools are better. Now we have phones that'll tell us what bird it might be. Little computers in our pockets. So things have changed, and so, but we still, if we still look at, those bird counts as, as a trend thing, you have to be careful because it looks like, if you look at some of these, if you look at this, it looks like the numbers are getting better for these birds. This is not a population trend. This is an observation trend. And that's the thing we have to keep in mind. Because I can guarantee there are fewer American redstarts today than there were in 74. We're just getting better at seeing them, getting better at getting more birders out, identifying. So I'll be happy to answer any questions. That's 10. There's another 23 that you can learn. Okay.
Okay, questions for Mike?
Yep.
Do any of those warblers, after hearing that, do any of those warblers come to feeders?
Well, if you're feeding insects, maybe, but yeah, no, they're definitely insect. They could come to a feeder. They would probably come to a bird bath, but having habitat. If you want them in your backyard, just plant an oak tree. Yeah, yeah, you live in the woods, so yeah. But as far as getting them down to a feeder, that's a little tougher. Yeah. But if you have a water feature, that's something that you'll see on that. How many of you remember, the little inchworms that are up in the tree that come down on the webs, the spring canker worms? They're not out yet, and so without the spring canker worms, the birds are avoiding us.
We didn't have many insects last year, did we?
Oh,
Well, we were
Yeah.
woods.
Yeah.
And Peoria has 500 acres of wildlife around us.
Yeah.
No insects.
Right. Yeah.
That's nothing last year.
Now, you touched on in your article in the paper on the prothonotary. So I
Mhm.
noticed he wasn't in your 10 up here.
Mhm.
Is that because it's that much rarer?
No,
Or
they're fairly
they're so
common actually.
beautiful? Oh,
Yeah.
they are.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I thought I would tell, that they are a nester here, but they're an unusual warbler in that they nest in tree cavities. So they will actually use like an old downy woodpecker's nest. But they're a wetland species. You'll find them Detweiler Riverside, East Peoria. The boardwalk is a great place to see them. Cooper Park, Spindler Marina, the boardwalk between those two is a good area. But yeah, so they're fairly common in those wet floodplains. Chillicothe Bottoms is another good area to see them.
I've been doing a lot of reading lately, and it seems that bird populations in general have really been declining. Is that true for warblers too?
It is, yeah. And that's one of the bird strikes are a big thing. They'll, I don't know if anybody remember, was it last year or year before in Chicago and McCormick Place, just thousands of birds, hit the windows. And that's one of their challenges. The other challenge is vagarities in climate, and that how we don't know for sure how that's going to affect. I mean, look at this year where we don't have a lot of insect population because it's been in the 40s at night, and it might get into the 60s in the daytime here, and that's just not enough for those insects to be active. And so those are challenges. All of those challenges add up to being a health stress for the birds. And so on the plus end, some of the woodland warblers in areas, their population is not in drastic decline because their habitats are still there, and many of these forests in the upper Midwest have rejuvenated from the 1900s when they were just basically clear cut. And so their numbers have actually come back a little. Where we're seeing a problem with our local nesting warbler species is cowbird parasitism because of fragmentation. We really, there's not a forest that you could go to around here where you couldn't see a cowbird happy in the middle of it. The cowbirds will still be in the middle of whatever woods. They'll go into the forest, quite a ways. And so our forests are just not big enough to offer that. But many of the warblers that we have here, like the yellow warbler and the water thrush and a few other, many of the species of warblers that are really good nesters here have adapted to survive with some of, with cowbird's parasitism.
We've been inundated with the red-winged blackbirds
Uh-huh.
out in the woods. We didn't used to get them back there in the woods, and now they take over everything.
Yeah. So yeah, they're probably not nesting. They're probably feeding. When the wetlands and marshlands are cold, they'll often go off habitat to search for food.
So I just wanted to make a recommendation. If you haven't seen this book, Mike mentioned books. There is a book that I think is so helpful for warblers. It's called The Warbler Guide by Tom Stevenson, and it has plates of all of the warblers in the springtime when they're brightly colored, plates of them in the fall when they're dull. It's got western warblers, it's got eastern warblers, it's got pictures from underneath, which is how you see them up in the trees. So you can start to recognize what they look like underneath. It's got a plate of just all their tails because, again, warblers are often up high and it really helps. Some have distinctive tails. So the Warbler Guide, I just have to highly recommend it.
All right.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.